So by the end, and we get to do this all in the same group, and that'll be great. We'll have ideally some analogies in mind
Yeah.
and some ideas of strategies we can use to apply those to the whole uh, gag reflex kind of problem. The inspiration for this particular piece of work was a research paper that came out recently that was talking about how what they call analogical innovation could be scaled up. So they were looking at, how might we use analogy with crowds and AI to put a problem in front of a group and get lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of potential ideas.
Mhm.
And we're going to walk through and one of the things that's really kind of interesting about this paper. Hi, Nancy.
Hi. Sorry, I'm late.
One of the things that was kind of interesting about that paper was that they had to, in order to make that kind of innovation available to AI and crowds, they had to break down the process, right? First we do this, then we do this, then we do that, and then decide which step of the process was best done by humans and which step was best done by AI, which made the analogical innovation project something that we could look at and say, aha, I can build a workshop on that because they've laid out the whole process. So
Mhm.
Nancy, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm sorry I'm late. I think I do volunteer work for youthful offenders, and a case is blowing up before my eyes. So I'm going to be, if you see me looking down, I'm getting the latest news.
Okay. Yeah. Anything you need to do to take care of business. I love your
Okay.
tulips. You all have beautiful flowers.
Oh.
So that's the background. We're looking at like helping people shift their perceptions around meetings. Obviously, 70 years of saying, hey, meetings matter does not work. So we need a different approach. And I thought we'd just start by getting our heads around that. So my intent when it was going to be more people was to throw us into a breakout and say, hey, this is our group, and we're going to work in small groups. We're going to work in small groups because we are a small group, so that's easy. And just start with like, hey, have you ever tried to change people's minds about meetings? And if so, what happened? Let's sort of anchor ourselves in the problem we're trying to solve.
Okay, for sure.
You want to kick off, Dave?
Sure. Yeah. I actually had this came up for me in the last couple of days. So you want an analogy or the background of
No,
trying to
real,
change people's minds?
yeah, a real example. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been working at a major utility here to teach them some techniques for structuring their work, communicating, and establishing requirements for projects, stuff like that. It's a very collaborative stuff. Um, And we did a lot of studies over the course of it against baselines against team, baselines against non-participating. What we discovered is that it was not our intention, but the number of meetings went up by 2 hours per week. Or sorry, 3 hours, no, 2 hours per week. Um, However, team satisfaction went up also substantially. The uh, the on-time delivery rate increased by 25% for the team that increased these meetings. Their sense of satisfaction with their work increased, and their self-perceived quality. In response to the question, I believe that the work that me and my peers create is high quality, also increased substantially versus those who weren't participating. So we saw meetings go up, but we saw almost every other measure was positive. So one framing of that is that people work together more and they got great results. But that's not how some of the stakeholders perceived it. They said, "Oh God, we've got more meetings. This is terrible."
Right.
So that's my example.
Wow, that's such a great case study, Dave. Um,
Yeah, and I'll just add, first of all, Dave, I keep thinking you're drinking wine, and I think, oh, that's a casual work day. But I see it's coffee, but it looks like a wine goblet from far away.
What do you mean? It's like 10 a.m.
Hi, Ashley.
Exactly.
Coffee.
So yeah, I love that example, Dave. And what I'll say to people is what is your alternative to same time meetings? I mean, the issue isn't that there are many meetings, it's that they aren't well run. So let's think about what makes a good meeting, what would be satisfactory. And so I think after I help them explore that, and I teach facilitation skills workshops to a number of clients, they realize it isn't meetings, it's bad meetings. And so it isn't that they don't need conversations, same time conversations. It's that they need to make them more productive. And yes, to also reach out and use asynchronous forms of communication as well. But so I don't have anything as quantifiable as you have there, Dave, but I do try to just help people distinguish between bad meetings and meetings.
So true.
Eileen, do you
There's
have an experience with this?
Uh, Mostly in the space of trying to help people run their meetings better. Like being clear about objectives, making sure there's some documentation or communication back to people who are not involved. And I've been struck by where I think this is has so much value anyway, but also now coming out of COVID with the return to work policies return to office policies that companies are putting in. Like I think what happened is there were a lot of things happening. There were some issues before that were covered up by people being face to face. And when people were not in the office and working more virtually, those issues rose to the surface. Things around like, how are we communicating when people aren't in the room face to face? How do we document decisions that were made? And that some leaders, instead of looking at the issues, right, they're thinking, we'll just go back to the way it was and they'll take care of these issues. And so I'm working with a group on that's trying to help. It's not a client; it's another group that's trying to help organizations do hybrid effectively, and this is such an important part of it.
Thank you. Ashley, welcome. Glad you could join us.
Thanks.
What attracted you to this topic, and do you have any experience of trying to change people's minds to take meetings seriously?
Well, I am actually just back from mat leave, so I was just looking on what sessions were coming up, and I just saw this, and I just thought it might be interesting. I just find that our organization, I work in the health sector, and so there's just so many competing priorities for our executives and their meetings, and so it's just overwhelming for them and a lot of information. So it's not necessarily them not participating or joining the meetings, it's just getting them to engage, being so overwhelmed with, I have another meeting in about 5 minutes and trying to get the information and move along. So we use like Mural a lot for our to facilitate meetings. I'm a planning specialist, so we work with executives to do strategic planning. And so we try and have things ahead of time so that when they come in, we kind of have what we're trying to help them move things forward. But sometimes I find that they'll show up in a meeting and be like, what's this one about? And it's kind of like, okay, well, this is why we're here, but it's almost wasted time by the time you get through explaining it. And then it's like, you guys didn't do your homework. So that's
frustrating.
kind of, like I'm here to help support you, but this isn't my work. So how to, figure out solutions to get them there. And I don't know if it's just by sending them emails ahead of time, but that's also, not my job to hold their hands to do that work too.
Right. Well, and then what we're focused on today is how do we get folks to think that it's important enough to put in the time to, come prepared and moderate the amount of meetings they're in so that they can in fact do the ones they're in well. And, all of those things, which starts by taking it seriously as a discipline. And paying attention to the skills that Nancy teaches and that Dave monitors and that I teach. So I have quite a bit of experience trying to work with people to take meetings seriously. And I thought today we're gonna play with this analogy. Let me walk you through the process. Is that cool? Okay, and for this, I've got some slides. We'll be working in these slides. I'm going to just share them for now, and then I'll share the link in a second. So, everybody see my orange using analogy? Great. So definitions first, in case there's any confusion, an analogy is a comparison between two things to highlight some element of them that's similar. And then when we talk about analogical innovation, which is what we're here to do, it's about noticing those similarities in things that are very, very different, and then using that to take a solution from one domain and apply it in another one. Make sense? Good. So an example, Velcro was created when the inventor of Velcro went for a walk with his dog in the woods, and they came back covered in burrs. Not maybe that many burrs. Thank you very much, Dolly, but lots and lots of burrs. And he noticed how they grabbed on to any kind of fabric and really stuck great. And he was looking for something that would be fast and easy and stick great. So he took the idea from the natural world and applied it to toddler shoes and many other things. So in the paper that I referenced earlier, they broke down the process for us, and it's basically 4 steps. Let's see if I can make this bigger for you. Whoops, whoops, whoops. This is not helping. Okay, so the first step is you identify what the problem is. And we're going to use an example they used in the paper. In the paper, they were like, their example problem was to fit more plugs into a power strip. That's what they're actually trying to solve. And then they abstract it. So they get to the underlying characteristics of the problem that might apply to other kinds of things. And in this case, their abstraction was fitting objects of different sizes into a container. So once you've got the abstraction, then you try to find analogies, not for the original problem, but for the abstraction. And that's a key step, because if you try and work off of this directly, people get stuck. But once you move into trying to find analogies for the abstraction, the world opens up to you. And they recommend 2 steps. First, who might have expertise in problems like that? What kinds of experts might solve this problem? And second, what solutions did they find? So the problem of fitting objects into different size containers, well, plumbers and magicians and contortionists and, shipping containers, carpenters, right? All of those people have to put all kinds of things into different size containers. And what did they find? Well, carpenters have curved drawers, and shippers, use stacks and whatnot. So then based on these solutions they found from these experts, they're like, okay, now, given those, look back at our original problem. Is there anything there we can use? And they came up with this power strip that could be stacked and molded and moved in all kinds of interesting ways so that you could fit plugs of different sizes around corners. Questions about this? Observations?
No, I like it.
Yeah, great. Let's practice one, and then we're going to split into 2 groups and work on doing the same thing for our problem set. So to all together, let's say our problem is that your coworker is eating all of your snacks from the company kitchen. So if we were going to abstract that problem, what's a underlying problem that kind of is similar to this problem, similar elements to it? Anybody, any thoughts?
Reminds me of the tragedy of the commons, the idea that when you have a shared resource that people don't value it. So the classic case of tragedy of the commons would be sheep herders on public land.
Right. Right. So and the tragedy of the commons, the underlying problem there is people use as much as they can of a shared space kind of a thing, basically.
Yeah, I think of it as 2 kinds of flavors, but what you said is exactly what you'd find in a textbook. I think there's one flavor where people consume it because they perceive it to be without cost.
Uh-huh.
And another another effect of tragedy of the commons is that if multiple people are drawing from a resource, each one may take what is a reasonable amount, but collectively is unreasonable.
Right. Okay.
Because each person feels a right to that common resource.
Okay.
And just to build on that, I'm trying to make this really simple. The problem is there are no rules about who owns the shared snacks, that who owns the shared resource. So it's along the lines of what Dave is saying, but to me, the real problem is lack of explicit or agreed upon rules. I'm assuming maybe the coworker knows the rules and is using.
Well, in this case, right, it's your snacks. The coworker's eating your snacks.
Oh, I didn't realize it was theft.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's they're eating your
Sorry.
snacks. Yeah, no, that's
I thought it was a shared resource.
Commons is not bad. Yeah. So like unclear ownership. Right?
Yeah. Or what are the rules about anything that gets put in this company kitchen is we all get to share it because of unclear rules.
Right. So you got unclear ownership, and then you've got no rules or accountability, maybe. For theft.
Yeah. Theft is what I would have put there instead of tragedy of the commons, but yeah.
All right. So we've got these kinds of problems. We got these tragedy of the commons, which I think is actually fair because it may be that they don't know, right? Unclear ownership and no rules or accountability. Who are some other experts that have to deal with those kinds of problems?
Police, certainly.
Yeah, police, security folks, right? Actually, pretty soon you'll have an example for this one. I'd say preschool teachers.
Yeah, I was going to say teachers.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Maybe one more?
I was thinking lawyers. I just feel like there's lots of gray space when it comes to law.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, cool.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say that too. I'm thinking about intellectual property. People, especially with AI, but even before AI, like I thought I could use that. I didn't realize that wasn't, it was on the internet. So I thought I could just use that content.
Right. That's cool. And right on. So we've got these kinds of professionals who deal with similar problems. How do they solve these problems?
Mediate.
Mediation. Mm-hmm.
I'd say create and communicate explicit rules.
Uh-huh. I'm gonna put post. Is that cool? Just for brevity.
Sure.
Yep. I mean, the preschool teachers, how do they solve it?
One-on-one. They talk to the group.
Yeah.
Like clarify rules and expectations.
I think one of the things the preschool teachers also do is they put people's names on things.
Labeling.
I was going to say labeling would.
Yep.
Yeah.
Labeling and cubbies, right? That's Jack's snack cubby, not yours, Eileen. Keep your hands out of Jack's snacks. Security folks, they
Cameras.
yeah. Can you imagine having, I've seen this actually. I worked at an office where they had a fridge camera.
Wow.
At one point.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's intense.
Yikes.
well, it was, it was a tech company and they had this problem and they solved it. So, okay, so we've got an abstraction of the problem, some analogies, and then some solutions from those analogies. What might we do to help keep our coworker from eating our snacks? Applying some of these ideas to our problem.
Well, what comes
Label.
to my mind, was someone else talking? Sorry, is posting the rules, like putting a little in Mylar or something, with posting that on the fridge or in the kitchen. And then in addition, if those were my snacks, that wouldn't be enough for me. I would take brightly colored Post-its and put them on my snacks. If I cared, and I assume I would care.
Cool. Does this process make sense? Cool. So that's what we're going to do. And now we're going to do it with the problem of the meetings themselves. And we're going to do basically each one of these steps one at a time for about 5 minutes. And I'm going to break us into groups of 2. Yeah, so 2 groups of 2. And you'll have a section where you can, let's see if I can get that to, this page has become weird, so I can show you what it looks like. So one group will start on the orange bit. I'm going to give you the link, and you'll do round 1 and you'll abstract the problem. Now I've taken the problem of people react to meetings without positivity, and I've broken it into some sub problems about different kinds of behaviors that sort of exemplify that problem. So we'll spend about 3-4 minutes abstracting the problem. Well, we'll come back, and then we'll move on to round 2, and we're going to switch. So you're working on the other team's abstraction. So that was one of the things they found in the research, is that you hand people an abstraction to work on, not the actual problem. And we'll move to round 2, where we look at some analogies of experts and solutions. And then finally, all together, we'll work on 3 and say, okay, given these things, what do we see for solutions? Does that sound like a plan? Cool. Any questions while I'm getting you set up here?
So I just want to be clear, team 1, do we then work on team 2's corresponding slide when we talk about the analogy? So we'll flip over to there and then come back to, and then all together we come back on the joint solutions.
That's right. And I will make that easy for you by moving the analogies around, moving the abstracted problem, so that you don't have to, you can basically stay, if you're in the orange slides, you can stay there. I'll bring you back and we'll make it super clear.
All right.
So group 1 is Dave and Eileen, and group 2 is Ashley and Nancy. You've got 5 minutes, and your job, everybody got the link there? It's in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Is to find your slide and abstract the problem. Sound good? Okay, I'll see you back in 5 minutes. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, so this was fascinating to watch. Tell me what that experience was like for you.
I found it a little frustrating not to know what their problem was, because I guess I could have looked, but I didn't. We just looked at the abstract.
Did anybody else experience that too?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know exactly what you're trying to solve when you have bits and pieces. You're insinuating a few things. So it makes it hard to know if you're addressing it properly, but I guess that's part of the exercise.
That is the point. Yep. Dave?
Yeah.
I said to Eileen when we got into our breakout session that I wanted to apologize to team 2 because we didn't prepare our notes in anticipation that you wouldn't get the first piece, right? So they would make more sense if you knew the first piece. If we'd known that was going to happen, we might have put a little bit more detail in our notes.
Same
so
here.
they would stand alone.
I know we didn't know either, so
Yeah.
However, right, I don't like the abstract space very much at all, but like for me, not having their problem was actually freeing, right? I just had to focus on, there's some issue with this. It was easier for me to think about who deals in this, who are people who deal in this kind of in this kind of abstract space. I think for me, knowing how I operate, if I'd had their problem, it would have been hard for me to disconnect from that.
Yeah. I wasn't advocating for putting the problem there, because this technique makes a ton of sense to me. I just would have put more detail in my notes about explaining my analogy or my my abstract.
Well, and so I've gone ahead and I've put the originals back into the slides that you had. One of the things I'm seeing from an outside perspective is that in your round 2 analogies, uh, you know, you found some interesting things to pick up on. Right? In the group where the original problem was that, oh, I got those backwards. The original problem, let me fix it. Sorry. So, oh no, I didn't.
No,
That's correct.
Yeah. So the original problem was that the company tried to fix meetings, but then they canceled them and then they all came right back. And the analogies that came out of the abstract were gardening, dental problems, mechanics, deferred maintenance things. And some of the analogy ideas are kind of interesting there. It would now I would love to take this and then spin it positive. Like, what are some positive actions, growing actions, rather than negative preventative actions we could take? Using those analogies would be kind of fascinating. In the second group, your original problem was a company leadership lacks interest in prioritizing the resources or the time on meetings. And you came up with financial analysts and advisors and data folks and some solutions based on that. And that's kind of interesting. It made me think of like my own financial needs. I'm not very financially oriented. My husband and my partner really, really hates this, but I'm just not. And I was like, oh my gosh, automatic rebalancing. Could you do something like that for a company's communication architecture where you say, hey, these are the things we prioritize. And it goes through and it does a report every once in a while and says, these stocks are no longer performing in alignment with your value. Reallocate your communication time. Like, I don't know of anything like that. That'd be kind of fun.
Oh, yeah, that would be really cool in a company. Yeah, I see that. Because that's what financial advising companies do, right? They're constantly different funds and all. They're constant. I don't have to think about that because I'm not good at that. They just do all that for me.
Ooh, I care about the outcome, but I don't care about paying attention to the details.
Yeah, I don't care how you did it.
Yeah.
And those of you in the gardening space, like one of the things to garden with is you outcompete the weeds, right? Like you plant a bunch of really great stuff, so weeds have nowhere to grow. What might that look like in the meeting space?
That's really interesting. I wouldn't have gotten there had you not on either of those had you not had those ideas, Elise. So thank you.
Me too.
That's really interesting.
So in our last couple of minutes, given this exercise, I have some debriefing questions in terms of do you see other ideas here that we might build on for our original problems, which is to help people embrace the awesomeness of meetings, or at least not immediately viscerally reject them?
Like, a question that I have for you, Elise, is like when you are giving people the abstract part, like do you find you're coming into the meeting with that ahead of time and talking to maybe somebody that's leading the meeting, or how does that work? Like, because I'm trying to think in my head, okay, like there's lots of problems, but like when do you introduce this to a meeting? Like, is it a start and you pull it apart and you say, here you go, I'm going to break you up into groups and get your feedback? Like, how do you typically run with
this particular process?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So full disclosure, I read this study. I was thinking about meeting problems and I said, hey, maybe we can try an experimental workshop. And then I went into the mix to schedule a different workshop, but I was distracted and doing too many things. So I scheduled this one instead. So I had actually meant to do this in 3 weeks when I thought it through. It's today. So my answer to that is who knows? This is the first time I've ever tried this. And so my first question is, hey, did it work for us? Did we come up with anything? And my second question is this a useful process in a workshop at all? Like, so in the study that I pulled this from, it was disaggregated. They had a problem statement and then they sent it out to crowds to asynchronously come up with abstractions. And then they asynchronously sent it out and looked for analogies to the abstractions. So each of those steps were done by crowds and artificial intelligence over time, not together in a room.
I see. You know what this reminds me of, Elise? There's something, I know I learned it using a certain term, but it's basically once you define the problem, let's say you have a narrowly defined problem, and then we say as a group, well, what's really the problem? What are the underlying themes? Okay, come up with that. Then ask, what's the worst we can do? What's the worst thing we can do to solve this problem? That generates ideas that then you flip later and say, so what can we learn from the worst? Like, how can we flip that back? This kind of reminds me of that, in that you come up with something that isn't quite related and then you kind of flip it or try to find a connection. It gets the brain going in a different way than if we just stuck with the original problem.
Right.
I love this technique, and I will totally steal it at some point. I think it's got a place for intractable problems. A thing like that can make a ton of sense. Or what Nancy said, that those techniques, that kind of forcing lateral thinking, or whatever you might want to call it, has a lot of sense when the problem is intractable, but seems like a waste of time if the problem feels straightforward. So I think that's the thing, is the people in the group have to be convinced that the problem is intractable before they will appreciate the investment of, because this is more effort than just saying, hey, how do you think we should fix this? But if, hey, how do you think we should fix it has failed many times, then you've got a case for trying something different.
Well, and to Dave's point, if we're doing, let's say, traditional brainstorming, if you focus on the question too narrowly, you get a bunch of ideas that only solve that. But if you take it up another level, you get a bunch of ideas that can solve something much more systemic. And there's like a happy medium between. You don't want to be too blue sky and you don't want to be too narrowly focused. But I think this approach helps us figure out what are some of those how can we go about solving some more systemic issues while we're solving the same problem. I don't know if I made any sense there, but I think it makes the level of problem just right versus too narrow or too much like boiling the ocean, which Gen Z people don't understand at all, that phrase. I have discovered.
Eileen, you look like you had a thought.
I was thinking about the what Dave was saying about the intractable problems. Like I think sometimes that's hard to, like, there'd be a lot of varied opinions about that, right? Is this an easy one to solve? Maybe we don't need to go here. Like, I really appreciate how this kind of took us aside for, well, in case of meetings, right? Like, yeah, that's been an age-old, challenge. So just even, I don't know, might be worth experimenting with one that might even seem straightforward. I think you might get some more innovative ideas for some things. And then, of course, I'm thinking of the framing tesseract too. From what perspective are we looking at these things as, yeah.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to combine them if you had enough time.
Yeah.
So, well, interesting. So I saw, this is a problem, this particular problem about how to help people think differently about meetings is something I've been on for a long time. And the bit where people recognize that it's something they've tried to fix and they haven't been successful, and they get stuck and they figure out why bother, like solving that isn't something I've seen. I haven't found great ways to do without impassioned leadership. Impassioned leadership works, but otherwise it's really, really a sticky spot. So I think maybe there might be something in a technique like this where the group is in that sticky spot that helps them see that no, problems like this have been solved in other ways.
Yeah.
Right. It makes the solution space possible in a way that they can't see when they're looking at the problem that they're looking at.
It removes the preconceived idea that the problem can't be solved because it invites you to consider places where it has been solved.
Right. This is essentially the same problem, right?
One thing in the world of analogy, there's a thing that popped into my head about a quote. I think it was a CEO of some company who said, "I'm pretty sure 80% of my advertising is a waste of money. Problem is, I just don't know which 80%."
Right. Right. Well, last question. There were people who wanted to come. I scheduled this with less than a week's notice because as I told you, I screwed up. So what should we tell them about what we did here today?
Definitely, we've solved the problem of meetings. I would definitely say that. Yeah, I mean, I kind of like what you just said around, this creates a space to, for those problems that keep coming up again and again. This opens up a space for, it's been the same fundamental problem has been solved in other ways, right? But we just have to get outside our thinking, get outside our boxes. Or not that we have to, but when we can get outside our boxes, we can see other alternatives.
I would probably say two things about the session day. One is that on one level, we learned a technique for solving problems. On another, it felt like we got about halfway to applying that technique to the actual problem.
Right.
And so I think both things are good. But if I were going to describe what it was, I think it was heavily about how to solve this intractable problems the group, and lightly about what that solution is for our specific case.
Yeah. I think we need like 3 times as long to get into actually applying it.
Yeah, well, we made great progress.
Yeah, because we didn't come up with a solution to the original problem of how to make meetings more palatable or more acceptable or more convince people they're better use of their time, et cetera. We come up with some ideas, but to me, and I just put it in chat, the real value is learning this process for getting out of the specific problem, using to use Dave's term, lateral thinking, to open up our minds to other solutions. So to me, this is a real mind opening exercise. Like if you believe in right brain, left brain thinking, which some do, some don't. But if you did, it's really about opening up that creative side of our brain to get to solutions that aren't obvious, no matter what the topic is or what the intractable problem is.
Very cool.
And I would agree with a lot that everybody else had said, that it really it challenges your way of thinking. It's not a typical way of problem solving. So it really had me thinking a little bit frustrated at times, but a way to get you out of your common way of thinking and expand and learn a new technique, which was really interesting. So yeah, I wasn't really sure what to expect today when I signed up for this. I was like, I have no idea what this is, like analogies. And then when I showed up and there's only a few of us, I was like, oh, what is this? But I really enjoyed it. And it was nice that it was a small, intimate group and it allowed us to have that conversation. And yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. And what Dave said, like, we learned the technique, but we still need to figure out how to progress and solve it or put it into time.
Thank you all for coming and experimenting with me on short notice.
Well, thank you, Elise, for putting it together.
Yeah.
It was a happy mistake.
A happy mistake indeed. Yeah. And so, we're at times you are very welcome to go. I know that and if anybody wants to just stay and chat, you're welcome to do that too. But yeah, that was it's fascinating. I mean, I know that in product land, this is where a lot of innovation happens, right? They figured out how to get the solar sails onto the satellites by talking to origami experts. But in social behavior land, which is what this is, and reputation land, a lot of opportunity to innovate.
So I do have a question for you, Elise, and is how do you see this process being different, if at all? Well, it would be different, face to face versus virtual.
Materials,
Yeah,
right? And I'd probably do a rotating tables,
yeah,
right? By Eileen.
Thank you.
I'd probably have, folks who developed the analogies, like either walk them over or, hand, like I was thinking about are you familiar with Luma's round robin process?
no,
Which is another way you could do it. So Luma's round robin process is pretty awesome. It's an innovation process for rapid prototype developing. So let's say our problem is the snacks in the refrigerator, something simpler, right? The first person writes down, here are my ideas for solving the snack theft problem. And then they hand that to the next person, and then there's a box underneath, and that person writes down, here's everything that's wrong about your solution and why it will fail.
wow, okay,
Right? And then they fold over the top bit. So the person can't see the original problem or the solution. And or the original solution, and they hand it over to the next person. And that person writes down, here are all the ways I can fix the things that you think are a problem. Right? So this person says, we're going to do a sign with rules. And this person says, nobody reads the sign and they'll totally ignore it because my snacks are delicious, and then this person says, you have to push a button that says you agree, and then it only dispenses snacks that belong to you, or whatever. And then you hand it to the fourth person and they combine the whole thing. Right. So I would see it working kind of like that. Like there would be this iterative thing, and then you get to the end and you'd have this whole set of stuff, and everybody would post them and go, oh, interesting. And then I would take like an hour-long break, and I'd have a beer or some coffee or snacks or something, and I'd give people like pens and brain space to play. And then I'd have them come back and do solutioning and say, what are like 3 ideas we want to develop outside of this call?
okay, all right, that sounds good.
Because I
And
think
that's
it would
called
be
Loomis round robin.
Luma round robin. It's just basically, it's kind of like a rotating flip chart thing, but there's that progressive. This group has done a thing. The next group's, it's kind of like the build a story thing you do.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
yeah, it's like that, only it's with the idea.
Okay.
I'll see if I can find it for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
The piece that seemed to be not present in this, that the next step would be to take this and then say, okay, let's go back to the original problem. Now let's take the analogy and apply it back to the original problem. What does this translate back into if you're trying to convert it back into the problem? I don't know whether that's the right step or whether there's one more intermediate step in there.
No, I think we just ran out of time.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So and I think that I think there's some soak time. My gut tells me soak time.
Yeah.
Like getting some ideas out originally and then going away and then coming back would make that richer.
Yeah, I agree.
Have you ever read Peter Drucker? He's got a book, Innovation and Entrepreneurship.
But I think I've seen a lot of experts. Tell what's bringing that to mind.
So that it's a lovely book, wonderful book. What he attempts to do in that, and it's like, I think he wrote it in like the 70s or something like that, maybe the mid 70s or early 80s. But what he was attempting to do was to systematically describe how a company could create innovation. That this is a thing that everybody was looking for, like, how do I make innovation? And it was thought, people were trying mostly approaches around, let's find innovative people and throw them in a pot. And I know that you put a lot of time in innovation, but one of the things that sticks in my head, Drucker lists like 12 different techniques a company can use. And his top favorite technique for reliably generating innovation is cross-pollination of disciplines. Mm-hmm. So take disciplines and bring them together that aren't typically brought together. And the innovation, things that are commonplace in one are not yet in the other. And so this is like, this thing is Drucker's, or Drucker was describing a version of this.
Right, right. And it would be really, I mean, so you participated and Nancy participated. Ashley, I don't know if you did or not in the experiment we ran, the ideation experiment we ran. And I think you suggested in the result. Um, but what we found was that creativity is incredibly rare. And I had this belief that if we brought interesting people from around the world and gave them sort of, a clear process and a simply stated problem, that we'd get these all kinds of fascinating ideas, right? Because, hey, what are some cool things we could do with a building? Well, there's a million cool things you could do with a building. But what we found was that about 80% of the final proposal ideas we got at the end were all relatively the same.
Totally.
Yeah. 200 people. Bye, Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you.
200 people, 77 proposals.
Super interesting though.
Right? So like that bit where you just throw people from other disciplines together, like that's a hell of a crapshoot. And it really doesn't work unless you have a way to actually encourage and surface the diverse perspectives better. And you can't just give everybody a chance to speak. It's not the equal opportunity issue. It has to be more aggressively intentional about finding creative difference.
Well, I could definitely picture the problem failing, that Drucker's idea failing. I hadn't even thought about it till you raised this, but you made me ask myself, now why would it fail?
Mm-hmm.
I think about what the company that I've been doing the training for, Agency Agile, calls the superior person problem. That if you have somebody in a meeting who is perceived to be the expert, that it suppresses novel thought from other people.
Right.